Okay, so the talk here is called Bitcoin is, kind of fill in the blank because there's a lot of different ways you can answer that question. And the way we're going to approach it tonight is, what is it? How does it work? Why did it come about? And then if you want to either learn more or acquire some, where do you turn? Right off the bat, I just want to say maybe, why is this something that we should even be considering? Well, if you look at price, that's kind of the big hook. I won't be talking much about price, but it's certainly something that's very interesting. We live in very interesting times, and it would benefit us no matter what to learn more, because there's something we can do with it that can hopefully make ourselves better off, especially as business people, and then in turn, hopefully we can help further bless the community. So always looking kind of how can we help strengthen the community. And a brief just note about the Guild. I love the Guild. I had an idea similar, a few degrees removed, a cousin idea of the Guild before it started, and I just happened to be moving in the circle with Roger's sons, and they told me Roger was getting this going, and I was just so thrilled to be a part. I think this is a great organization, and I really want to see it not just survive and thrive. So that's another reason why I'm here, is I think that if we are informed on this as the Guild, that's some power, that's some TNT there. The preface. So again, this is informational use only. Read all the fine print, look at the slides after the fact, but I'm here to give you some technicals. I may have made a mistake at some point. I may misspeak at some point. Just so you know, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a professional investor. I'm not even, like a certified techie or economist. So this is all for educational purposes. I'm going to hopefully help point you to things, but I'm not interested in giving financial advice per se. I don't want to do that. That's on you. So just make sure you take this all under advisement, and this is just help move the ball forward. That's my goal. Okay, so we're just going to dive in right off the bat and talk about two big ideas that are germane to the vast majority, or at least a large chunk of cryptocurrency, and make sure those play. So this is why I might move around so I can see what's going on. So those two ideas are decentralized or decentralization and cryptography. And if you don't know what those mean, and you feel like that icy grip of this is techno jargon, you said this was going to be easy, I want to kind of put your minds at ease. We're going to examine these two ideas, beat them to death, so they're really simple, and then we're going to build on top of them. So whenever there's a new, or I'd say kind of a more tech-centered word or specialist word, I want to make sure we really cover thoroughly what it is before we try and build on top of it. So we'll look at each of these words in turn, and then we'll proceed after that. Hey, it works, great. Okay, so the first idea is centralization, or you can think of it as decentralization, and it's a spectrum. So a thing can be more centralized or less centralized. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's a big word, I don't really like it, but on the one hand, we have something that's totally centralized. And in that case, if you want to interact with somebody kind of in that network, well, it's not really much of a network, it's kind of like a mine, I guess. But in order to do that, you'd have to go through the center. And you can only go through the center. So that'd be something that's like totally centralized. And we'll go into an example in a moment. And by and large in our life, we find things that are centralized and decentralized, and it's kind of a mix. So on the one end, totally centralized. Then if we go to the other end of the spectrum, we have something totally decentralized. And in something that's totally decentralized, any one point in the network can communicate or interact with any other one point. And we'll use the word node for points in the network. So if you want to communicate with any one party, you can just go directly to them. You don't have to go through a middle party. So hopefully that makes sense. That's centralization, but let's build on that idea right now. So a great example of a centralized system is a bank. If I have money in a bank and I want to give you money that's in the bank, I might be able to give a check to you, but ultimately, where's that money? How's that money going to end up in your account? It's got to go through that bank. And if you don't bank at my bank, well, then the bank's got to communicate, and then you have layers of banks and so on and so forth. But the long and short of it is, unless I'm giving you the thing, it's going through, it's like the cash, it's going through that central institution. Prime example of a central institution, and they have their pluses and minuses. So that would be, we can think of one end, there's our centralized system. And on the other end of the spectrum, something that's decentralized. I think this one's a little harder to think of, and there's a great example from history, which are monasteries, but we're probably not too hip on the workings of the medieval monasteries. So I'm going to take a part of the monastery, which was the library. And back in the heyday of monasteries, you'd have a library and a scriptorium where the monks would copy texts. And the neat thing that would happen across Europe is, a monastery in France could be copying the same books as the monastery in Germany. And then what will end up happening is all across Europe, you basically have like a repeat of the library. So the same library would be present in France, Spain, Germany, England, and so on and so forth. So the neat thing about this system is you didn't have to go through any central party. Like a monk in France could go to a monk in Spain. A monk in Spain could go to England, and so on and so forth. And then the books would all be copied. So if you want to actually destroy a book, it's not enough to just destroy one monastery or even destroy France's monasteries. You'd have to take out the entire system, because if you leave one monastery standing, its library's there, it can keep copying the information and spreading it all around. So a great example of a network that's decentralized, we can maybe wrap our heads around, is a library. And that has advantages and disadvantages as well. So centralization and decentralization, a spectrum. Hopefully that's clear. Idea number 2, cryptography. Another big word, and I'm not going to use it too much, or at least I'm not going to use it the way it's normally used. I always want to think about what the idea revolves around, and it's about locking and unlocking. So we don't even have to get into secret ciphers and your secret decoder ring from your Ovaltine or anything like that. Just think cryptography is security. It's about locking and unlocking. Should hopefully hit us upside the head that if you can unlock a lock, then you can get what's inside. So cryptography, it's about locks, controlling who can get inside and who can't. But let's build on that with a really concrete plastic example here. So if you had a treasure and you wanted to protect it, there's all sorts of different things that you could do to protect it. You could have layers of security, layers of defenses. And what I want us to think about is, if cryptography is about locking and unlocking, then each of those layers is like a level of defense. I want us to think about that for cryptography. It's a level of defense. So let's pretend you have a special treasure. Maybe it's a relic, maybe it's gold, who knows? And we'll go back to medieval times because it's helpful to kind of think that way. It's very tactile. So if you had a special treasure, what could you do to keep it safe? Well, you could build a moat. You could maybe put your fortress on a hill. You could build a fortress. You could have nice walls. Maybe, if there are cannons, you also have really thick sloped walls. Who knows? You got locks, you got keys, you got all this jazz. And you're keeping your treasure safe. But with all those levels of defense, we can think of it as those levels of locks, there's a way that you can unlock them. So if you got a castle, you could siege it, just starve them out. That'd be really expensive, but that's one thing you could do. The blue guys are the bad guys in this presentation. So you could cross the moat with your boats, okay? Still, pretty costly. You're going to take a lot of hits this way. All right, you climb up the hill under heavy archer fire. You scale the walls. So for all these locks, there's a way to unlock it. And there's like a legitimate way, like maybe, you have our orange fellows and they extend a bridge so you can cross. But there's a way to to force through as well. And even if you get down to like more like a granular level of security, like you got a door, okay, well, that door is only going to be as secure as the lock. Is it a simple lock? Well, maybe you can just smash it. Is it a complex lock? You can probably pick that. Maybe you can like use a password, like, you know, you can only enter if you have the special password. So with all these levels of defense, all these locks, there's a way to unlock them. That should, again, hopefully be clear. So with a physical thing, there's a way you can fake it or break it. And just go back to the example of a lock. If you have a really simple lock, you might just be able to smash it. If it's a really hardy lock, well, maybe you take out the bolts on the doors. Maybe you go around the lock. Maybe you pick it. With everything that's physical, there's a way that you can either fake the key or that you can break the lock. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, what can't you fake? And I want to maybe pause for a second, just let that hang, because I want your imaginations to contemplate. What couldn't you fake? Because I know when I kind of imagine, prior to putting together this presentation, it's really hard to think about what couldn't be faked. I think we always have this nagging suspicion, like there's always something that you can do. And I'm going to offer this as something you can't fake, which is a riddle. So if I say, I'm only going to give you what's in this room if you answer the riddle. And let's pretend that's the only way you're getting in is you answer the riddle. Well, then the only way to get in that room is to answer the riddle. Maybe if I can be so bold as to use a good theological example, this is a great one. Good job, me. So if the Lord knows something and we're to find it out, the only way that we can really gain access to it is if he reveals it to us. So there's like a super strong lock, revelation. It's something we can't even get to unless he reveals it. So it's not entirely dissimilar. Let's pretend it's like that level where the only way you're getting in is if I say, yep, you got the answer right. So you can't fake like an answer to a riddle. The riddles, by and large, if you hear riddle, there's like a clue within it. Otherwise, it's a really lame riddle. So maybe we'll take like the circle of things that we could consider as riddles, and we're going to expand it. And we're going to say, pretend my riddle is this. You need to guess a number. And that's a terrible riddle. It's not fun at all. But the way that you're going to be able to actually crack that riddle is by giving the correct number. Which hopefully makes sense. That should also be like, well, okay, if it's 1 through 10, that's pretty easy to break. Let's pretend I'm really neurotic, clearly. And I've made this riddle like this number you have to get, it could be anywhere between 1 and I'm going to make up a new Kevin Gurn's number, a cajillion. Good luck. You got to get the number correct for you to kind of solve this riddle. So how would you end up breaking that? Darn it, I touched the pad and gave it away. You have to do something like this. So 1, I say no. 2, no. 3, no. 0118999881999119725 no. So the only way you're going to break that riddle, where the answer is getting the correct number, and that's all you know, is by brute force guessing. You just offer something up, see if it works. And this is where we're going to first kind of peel back or part the curtain a little bit and say this is like what Bitcoin is using, where it's if you want to break something, you got to guess this number that could be absurdly complex. And we'll get more into that in a moment. So that's cryptography and decentralization. And the way we can think of it, it's about tough locks, cryptography, and then a really widely distributed system. And you'll see that appear over and over again throughout the presentation. And if at any point you need to squint to see the slides or what have you, remember this is going to be recorded and there's going to be other information available. So let the waves kind of wash over you here, and don't try and force it. So cryptography and decentralization, 2 key subjects that are germane to cryptocurrency. Now again, you probably have that nagging suspicion that's like, but can it be broken? Computers do stuff really fast. And we won't go into the nitty-gritty details because it kind of falls outside the pale of a broad technical overview. Suffice it to say that if you were to actually try to do that brute force guessing and just guess 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, were you to have heroic numbers of supercomputers that don't exist, the computers don't exist right now, nor do the numbers exist, and you were to have enough fuel, and enough money to run them, and so on and so forth, this is kind of the level of complexity we're talking about. The sun would burn out before you were able to brute force that, and the Earth, or like the Earth would freeze over. So the whole point is this is a very practically difficult, costly thing to try to break. Or you just have really insane luck. So that's also possible. But we're kind of talking like winning the Powerball 9 times in a row, kind of insane luck. So that's the level of security that we're talking about. Okay. So once again, cryptocurrency, broadly speaking, are more or less decentralized and cryptographically secured. I'm going to power through that, ignore it, there we go. And key emphasis here is on decentralized and cryptographically secured, and particularly on more or less. Cryptocurrency covers a broad array of subjects, so we can't say definitively about every little one, but they're more or less decentralized and cryptographically secured. Now, why do they exist? Pretty important subject. Well, I guess I can't speak broadly as to why they all exist. Who knows the proclivities of some nerds out there. But what do they purport to solve? And they purport to solve a problem of money. And right now we have digital money. And we're familiar with it. And digital money has actually been kind of have a fairly long pedigree, if I'm using that word correctly. But what we haven't had in digital money is effective scarcity. So digital money has always been something that's centralized, that some party can control access to or issuance thereof. And long and short of it is you need to trust that central party. So what these claim to do or purport to do, and they do to various degrees, is make money that's digital scarce. A brief note on impossibility. So I'm going to be saying every once in a while throughout the presentation words like, you can only do such and such. Only so-and-so can do yada, yada, yada. Blah, blah, blah is impossible. So what I want to just make sure we hit home here right now, and not distill the message though, is what do we mean by impossibility? Well, now technically it would be impossible for me to run through this wall. Like, that would be an impossibility. Don't want to get too philosophical. It's partly my background though. But now, is that an absolute impossibility? No. Even some physics-y minded people would say, well, maybe like all the atoms kind of gel and you slip right through that wall. So what do I mean by impossibility? I don't mean true metaphysical impossibility. But what we mean is practical impossibility. And when I say practical, that word doesn't get enough credit. Like, think as impossible as something can be, so it's sneaking up to impossible, not quite there. And if that still doesn't put your minds at ease, think stronger, arguably stronger, than anything out there that's a like offering. And the cool thing is the more you kind of learn about this, the more you see, oh, shucks, like, yeah, wow, there's a lot going on here. So just so I'm not on the hook for when I say only or such and such is impossible, I want to make sure we're clear on what's meant by that. Okay, so now if you're paying attention with the outline here, that's cryptocurrency in general. Now we're going to launch into Bitcoin in particular. And this is just supposed to be a 30,000-foot view. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take a 30,000-foot view, get a really nice broad brush stroke, 'cause I'm a painter, so hey, how about that? So we'll take a really broad overview, and then after that we're going to launch into a helpful analogy that I think makes the guts, the technical workings, a little bit more digestible. So what is Bitcoin? Important question. That's what this talk purports to address. And first thing I want to think about is, like, if you're going to store information, your notes on Bitcoin, in your folder on your computer, what folder are you going to put it in? Because it could fall under a lot. So is it tech? Yeah, it's tech. Is it economics? Oh yeah, you bet. Finance? Sure. Politics? Deals with money, so it's a pretty big thing. So yeah, it falls in, you can put it in any of these folders. There's different ways you can think about it, and I want to caution against one of those folders, not one of those folders, but maybe a folder you might want to put it in, which is a fad. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about where this thing come from. Who are the early adopters? What problems is it looking to address? And we'll look back a little bit. We don't turn back history too much, but even this, especially in 2021, it's almost ancient history. Look at the Great Recession, which, interesting to know, I was in seminary at the time. I didn't even know there was a recession going on. Found out several years later. I was very focused on my studies. But, and my dad, no, you don't need to know my whole story. We can talk about it later. They're just riveted to hear that, Kevin. Okay, so the Great Recession, go back to 08, 09, 07. So in 08, October, about Halloween, is when the creator of Bitcoin, or creators, we don't know, they remain anonymous, published a paper describing what Bitcoin is. And it's only 9 pages. If you have a drive and you're not even techie, you can understand it. Might be a bit of a, might need to have your Wikipedia pulled up while you're reading it. So that's when he first published his paper saying, I think I've put together this thing that solves several problems of digital money. So that's back in 08 when that paper came out. 09 is when the software first came out. So he put together the paper, but he already had the software. Good to go. So we go back to the Great Recession. That's when this kind of comes on the scene. But we can go even further back. So there's a movement that really had its heyday in the 80s called the cypherpunk movement. And these were a group of largely gentlemen, as you can probably imagine, not very social either, who were very concerned about tech, censorship, and privacy. So that's where, like, a lot of the genesis of Bitcoin, a lot of its precursors, they all comes out of participants in this movement. And like I said, that had its heyday in the 80s. But let's walk even further back. Who were some of the early adopters to Bitcoin besides, like, these cypherpunk, very small, relatively small group of people? So that was the Austrian economics school. So that's the school that I'm interested in. It's not about Austria, in case anybody here is not versed in Austrian economics. It's a school of economics that has its origins with a bunch of Austrian dudes going back to the 1800s. So a lot of the first adopters of Bitcoin were also the cypherpunk guys who themselves were dabbling in Austrian economics. And it's these people who had been studying this economics school, and they looked at it and they said, I think this solves some big problems. Now we can push things even further back, just to torture ourselves for a moment, and just think, well, if this aims to solve a problem of money, how old is money? It's old. The earliest form of writing we have is ledgers of who owes what to whom. So it goes way back to money, kind of the institution of banking, which is thousands of years as well, and cryptography as well, because cryptography is about locking and unlocking, as I'm going to construe it. So this has deep roots. So that's what I want to say. It's new, it's hip, but it's important to realize that while it's, which I got, where's my little, boom, click that. So while it's the next step for some, like these fellows that I just mentioned, for others it might be a great leap. So it's important to realize that it might be new for us, but for a lot of people it was, this is the piece of the puzzle that's missing. So what is Bitcoin? Well, I'm not just going to leave you hanging. So the word is used to refer to, in the space, it's used to refer to 3 things primarily. So first you could call is the currency unit. So that's the thing that's exchanged, that things are denominated in. Good analog. Let's just think about like the Federal Reserve notes and coins that we know and love. So think like that when you think the currency. So it's that thing that sloshes around. Bitcoins also use the word to refer to the protocol. There's a tech word that I want to beat to death before we use it again. So protocol, you can just think of, it's a software program and it's a plan. And what is the Bitcoin protocol? It's the plan for making Bitcoin work. So it's got everything needed within it to run a currency. So we're talking, how do you verify a transaction? How do you keep tally of who owns, who controls what? How do you issue new currency? So on and so forth. So that's all contained in the Bitcoin protocol. When you see protocol, if it helps, just think software, or just think plan used to control or affect all the parts of the currency. So currency, protocol for making it work, and then this is a really key one, which is the network. So if I was the only one running the Bitcoin protocol, that's not very impressive. And I don't know how much it really means. It's just one guy having a fun experiment. And I'm a fun guy, obviously, because here I'm talking about cryptocurrency. But the network is what it also refers to, because if it's one person running it, okay, 2 people, it's not terribly exciting. Start to expand it, though, and you have tens of thousands, millions. Okay, that's kind of more than the sum of its parts. So Bitcoin refers to those 3 things. Hopefully that's clear. Now, why should you care? Very important. And this is going to be a fun little segue we're going to go into in just a moment. I'll try not to get too passionate. Tap that. So I think there's 4 big reasons why we should care, but I want to address this A-team that's assembled here, because this is pitched to Minnesotans. Moreover, we're Twin Cities persons. We're business persons, or at least that's who we're targeting, and we're Catholics. So we got a kind of unique little section of humanity here that we're addressing. So maybe I don't know all of your situations, but we're in a similar boat, at least in some ways. So why should we care? And this is where I'm getting a little passionate just for a moment, and then we'll take our first break. Well, because we need to wake up. Because if you examine like macro trends that are going on in society right now, they are not going in our favor. Like it's not a great world out there that we're in, and particularly I think in the Twin Cities, as we are familiar with what's happened in the last 15 months or so. In addition to COVID restrictions, there's also the lockdowns, and there's the general trend of the Minnesota and Twin Cities society. We live in a hostile environment, and I don't know how much we wake up and we think we do. I think we kind of think, you know, it's America, and it's got a lot going for it. It's awesome. Glad we're not North Korea. But we're not, like, we're sojourners and strangers, and this isn't our true home. So I don't know if we really live with that consciousness that we are kind of behind enemy lines. And I don't want anybody to be neurotic about that and just be like, oh man, they're coming to get me. But just know that if we're not conscious of that, if that doesn't affect us the way we view things, I think we're disconnected with reality. So I kind of want to offer, you know, the illustration of there's so many illustrations we could talk about, but we'll just, because I don't want to invoke the authority of Scripture, lowly me, so I'll just use the example instead of the frog in the boiling pot. Well, as the example goes, you're all familiar, the frog doesn't have like that long time horizon, so it just goes, all right, a moment ago wasn't so bad, so, you know, I'm in a pretty good place. It's toasty, it's warm, I'm still wet. What's going on, the macro trend is that frog is dying, it's being cooked. And I think if we're like the frog and we're just looking back to what's happening a moment ago, we're going to miss the big picture. And if you look back in history, I don't know if you ever do this, but you kind of go, the hints were all there. Like, there's a really big macro trend going on. How did these people not see it coming? Well, I think they were doing the frog thing and just hoping that things were going to work out, but no one's coming to save us. I think it's especially relevant for the parties here. I'm about to come to the end of my doom and gloom and passion speech here, so I want to recommend, one, not lose your cool, because we're Christians, and we have great hope. Our Lord has overcome the world. But I want to recommend, if it's not too sinful, is for our model, rather than the boiling frog, the spiteful elephant. So I think we should be people we should be a little bit more what's going on. Our Lord talked about be, shrewd as serpents. And when I say the spiteful elephant, what I mean is we need to start looking a little further back, comparing not where we were yesterday, but where we were a year ago, 10 years ago, so on and so forth. So I want people, one of the big takeaways from this talk is, I hope when you come away from it, you kind of look back and go, these macro trends really aren't great. What can I do to best position myself and my community, bless others in this world we are living in? First break. So I'm a teacher. I'm going to have you stick to 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. So be ready to come back in 5 minutes. We set our palette here. So hopefully what I have said thus far has been clear, but let's recap, because I love a good recap. So concepts, decentralized. Think of it as a spectrum. Something can be more centralized or less centralized. If it's more centralized, you got to go through that central party. If it's less centralized, then you don't. Cryptography, big word. We're just going to think about locking and unlocking. And we'll build on both of these topics. Bitcoin refers to the unit. Think of it like the currency unit. You'll see me doing this a lot because you have to kind of speak analogously a lot when you're talking about Bitcoin. It's the protocol. I'm going to use that word a lot. I don't like it. It's a big techie word in my opinion. So I just mean the software that runs everything needed to run the currency. And the network. So how many people are running the Bitcoin software? How many nodes in that network are there? That's the final thing that we're going to use Bitcoin to refer to. Okay. We left off at why should you care? And I'm going to offer 4 quick takes as to why you should care, but you all have your own reasons. So let's talk about them really quickly. Just broad brush strokes. So first, I'd say there's a macro reason why you and whoever this reaches should care. It's because if Bitcoin is what its proponents say it is, that would have huge implications for our society, for the way that finance occurs, finance being, or money being effectively half of every transaction. That touches on a lot. So if there's mass adoption or implementation, that's got a huge effect on a macro level. But it's not something that you need to just wait for everybody else to adopt. It can make a difference in your life right now. I'm reticent to talk about price when it comes to this. But it's obviously interesting. The price has gone up a lot in the last several days. It's gone down a fair amount. And if you're just measuring by the last several days, but if you've been a long time holder, ain't nothing. So it can have a big impact on your own finances. You don't have to wait for everybody else to adopt it. Then the other 2 kind of reasons why I think you should care. One is, we're going to call it the am I too late? I think that's a lot of people do. And you see this throughout Bitcoin's life thus far. So people will be like, oh man, I didn't get in at $1. I'm too late. Oh man, I didn't get in at $100. I'm too late. I didn't get in at $600. I'm too late. And so on and so forth. So am I too late? I'm not going to say yes or no. But I will say, if Bitcoin is what its proponents say it is, and it's gunning for being the reserve currency for the world, doesn't seem like you're too late if that's the case. Price is high right now, but compared to what? The value might be nice. But this isn't a talk where I'm going to steer you towards any one asset or anything like that. Then finally, I'm going to say the fourth reason you should care is it's argument from authority, which I know is a fallacy, but it's worth something, which is there's a lot of really impressive minds that have gone down the rabbit hole. And when we show those folders, like there's impressive minds when it comes to tech, finance, economics, politics, who have just become enamored with this thing. So if you're not familiar with them, there's a whole world that awaits that you can learn about. But it's not just like a bunch of day traders or esoteric techno dweebs. There's a lot of them. But there are also some other parties who, if nothing else, they're worth listening to. Now, oh, nice, I just said parties. So who are the parties involved when it comes to Bitcoin? And we're going to focus in as it concerns us, as I imagine it would, which is, we're Joe and Susie, Twin Cities resident. Who are the parties, particularly if I'm going to be using this thing or wanting to learn more, who is involved? So let's talk about that. So first are the nodes. Remember, nodes just refers to those protocol runners. Protocol being everything necessary for running the currency. So I was going to bring a node today because I have a node at home, but it's not a very complex machine. It's really just a computer program. You can run it on a laptop. So just imagine that's a node. Hopefully your imagination's strong enough. So there's protocol runners, or nodes. Then there's users, transactors. Everybody here, if you had a Bitcoin wallet, you could be considered a transactor, somebody who sends and receives Bitcoin. So users thinks transactors, Joe and Susie, whoever. You don't need to have a node to be a transactor. Okay, so we said Bitcoin is three things. If it's three things, then it's really important to know maybe the number of some of these things. So let's look at the number of the currency and the number of the network as well. How many are involved? So for Bitcoin, the currency, 21 million. Why that number? I don't know, sounds good. That's what the inventor put together. Now that's divisible into, you don't have to look at all the commas, 2.1, if my math's correct, quadrillion kind of subunits, if that's helpful to think about. So you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can get a 100 millionth subunit. Good way to think about it, you can't see this, but you can if you want to look later. What does that kind of break down to? Well, it's about 0.0025 Bitcoin per person on the planet at present. 21 million. Right now, there are about 18.7 million that have already been issued onto the network. And there 6.25 right now are issued onto the network about, on average, every 10 minutes. So the way the protocol runs is it's got that set limit, and it's, if I'm using the word again correctly here, asymptotic, where it's going to keep approaching that 21 million total Bitcoin. So right now you could say it's inflationary, but that'll eventually stop, and it's capped by the protocol at 21 million. That number will be realized, estimated about 2140, the year 2140. So 21 million total. How many nodes are there? How many software runners are there? We don't know. Potentially thousands. John, really quick. I want to save questions for the end, but indulge me really quick and we'll see. Do you have a question?
If there's 16 million out.
18.7, roughly.
18.7
Yep.
outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And this began to be mined, or
Yep. Mine. Yep.
mined onto and then offered onto the network.
Mm-hmm.
How many years ago was that?
2009.
So in 10 years we get to 18 million,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to take
Yep.
20 more years.
Correct. Because,
2 million more?
and this is where, yes, and the math there, because if you did the math really quick, I don't do math really quick, but John does math really quick. So you go, how does that work out? So what happens is the issuance, and this is one question I'm going to take because I want to make sure we're keeping that macro picture flow. The issuance halves over time. So what's going to happen is, and I forget the exact block number, I think it's like 200 some odd thousand. So every 200 some odd thousand blocks, it's gibberish right now, so let me just say it like this. Every 200 some odd thousand, if my math's correct, times on average 10 minutes, the issuance halves. So I forget the year.
It's every 4 years.
So every 4 years what's happening is the issuance halves. So do you know when it's gonna?
Right now, it's halved in May of 2020.
Yeah.
And so it will have again in May of 2024.
Yeah, there we go. So then that issuance, which presently it's 6.25 for every block, so you can just think 6.25 Bitcoin are added to the network every 10 minutes. That's going to halve to 3.125. Did my math? I think I did my math right. 3.125 in 2024. So if you got a question, write it down. I will totally do whatever I can to field any and all questions to the point where it doesn't kill me, but gets me pretty close. So I want to make sure we're maintaining that macro picture. You're going to have questions. This is a great segue. You're going to have questions that come along as I'm giving the presentation. I'd be surprised if you didn't, and I won't be able to answer them all in the presentation because, gosh, this is a complex subject. So write them down, and my hope is we get that macro picture. Okay. Now here's a significant number. How many are involved? There's zeros involved in Bitcoin. So make sure I read this correctly. So there's no central parties that control Bitcoin. There's no middlemen. You don't have to ask permission to join the network. There is no one you need to trust, though there is still going to be a practical point where you're going to trust somebody, but you can verify everything that's being done on the network. There's no single point of failure. And like I said, there's no one you need to ask permission of to either join the network or send a transaction. So it's permissionless. That's obviously a function of the software, so we can talk about that maybe more later. It's decentralized. So where are all these players, these parties, and we're just going to focus on the nodes, the software runners, and the transactors. So on the node level, this is where Bitcoin is very decentralized, because any node can communicate with any other node. Typically the way it works, though, is you're only communicating with a small chunk, and then that ripples across the network. So think about if I have a friend, imagine that I have a friend, and I talk to them, and they have 8 friends, and they have 8 friends, and they have 8 friends, how quickly a rumor can spread to that whole network. So you got the nodes, very decentralized. They're the ones who run the protocol. And then you have the transactors. And the key you observe here is, while the nodes are decentralized, the transactors, it's kind of a centralized thing. Let's unpack what this means. So if we look here, think of it like this. If you're a transactor, you got a wallet, and you just do your little magic, and you say, send such and such from this address to that address. It's got to go through a node. You think of it like this. If I just go out into the street and I yell, from address A, send X amount to address B, it's not going to do anything. How do those transactions actually occur? They go through the nodes. So if you're not running a node, you're going through a node. If you're not running the software, somebody's running the software and you're using their node. We're focusing, again, as it relates to us. So what's the timeline of how Bitcoin works, like a particular transaction? So first thing that happens is, from your user experience, is you propose a transaction. And I think it's good to think of it like it's proposed. It's not definite yet, but effectively it's on a one-way street to being accepted and finalized. Then what happens is some nodes assemble those transactions together, and they create a block of transactions. For block, just think it's a chunk in a list. So they verify the transactions. They go, yep, Susan definitely has that money. They don't even know it's you though, Susan. But they go, yep, she's got that money, valid transaction. let's write it on the master ledger. So some nodes do that. And if you've heard of mining, any node can mine, because that's part of the protocol for running the software, for running the currency. But it's kind of an industrial process right now, so while every node can mine, you could mine if you have a node, practically there are special nodes that are mining because they need some special equipment to do it. So they take your transactions, they order them, they verify, make sure they're legitimate, and then they add that onto an ongoing list of transactions. And that occurs, on average, every 10 minutes. So that's like Bitcoin's heartbeat. That's just the timeline. We're going to go a little bit more into why and what this means. I just want to get that clear that what happens is you propose a transaction, a node packages it together, and then they add it onto a ledger. That's all you need to worry about right now for the timeline. Hopefully that's clear. You'll have questions. I can see brows furrowed, but we'll hopefully answer those now or in a follow-up. So how does that work? Good question, Kevin. Thank you. So think about it like this, macro picture. A transaction is effectively, if you're not doing something shady, effectively on a one-way street to being finalized, finally settled, irreversible, practically speaking. And we'll look more about how it works in the analogy that we're going to use second part of the talk. So again, if this doesn't hit home, just let it marinate. We'll talk more about it. So you're a user. You say something like, from address A, send X amount to address B. That's all you really need to worry about. The software will take care of the rest. So what happens with that transaction? You say it, goes through a node, and then that node spreads it to the nodes it's connected to, and they spread it to the nodes that it's connected to, and so on and so forth. So that's why I like to think of it as you propose a transaction. And we can just think of it really simple. Just from A, X is going to B. This takes practically no time, but it does take a little bit of time to make a transaction. Move transaction, there we go. So then what happens next after you make that transaction? It's shared across the network. Well, those nodes that are mining, putting together transactions for the single canonical ledger, they take it, they validate it, make sure it's legitimate, I should say verify it, and then they pack it together into a list with other transactions. So that's what comes next. And important to note that when you spread your transaction, a number of different miners could pick up that same transaction. So, A, B, and C could all be putting your transaction into their list to be added to the master ledger. Then what do they do with that transaction block? Just think chunk of transactions, is they are in a contest. It's a little weird, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. They're in a contest to have their block, and only their block, effectively, added to the list. So all the mining nodes, all the nodes that are packaging together the transactions, they're in a contest, a race against time and the other nodes to have their block accepted into the single canonical ledger. And the idea is, let's pretend you got transaction in this chunk of transactions here, this block. Well, if we add 5 more blocks onto the end of that, it gets exponentially more difficult to reverse a transaction the more blocks you have behind the block that your transaction's in. So that's where, again, can it happen? Yes. Can I walk through that wall? Maybe. It's kind of that where it's like practically it gets so difficult to reverse transactions. So that's why it's considered more and more finally settled, more and more irreversible. Is it metaphysically? No, but it's something you can kind of hang your hat on. But let's not lose the big picture here. So you make a transaction, it's packaged together, And then, oh, I got this. Let's see what this does. So it's shared and verified. You make a transaction, it's shared and verified. Do they have this amount? Yep, they can do that. Then it's grouped together with other transactions. And then it's added to the ongoing record of transactions, and so then it's considered effectively settled. Again, if you're browse furrowing at this, we're going to unpack it in the analogy section. And I'm going to try and anticipate a question here, which is, well, why the chain? Why are you doing this thing where you're adding them onto the end of the chain of transactions? So ultimately, it's important to realize why, because Bitcoin is purporting to solve a problem with money, particularly digital money. Without the chain, it's one of the key ingredients to Bitcoin, it devolves into he said, she said. So in other words, it evolves into a system where you have to trust a third party or a central party. So that's the big reason. But the kind of more nitty-gritty meat and potatoes here is that list of transactions, that chain of blocks of transactions, that's the ledger. That's the money. Think of it like this. If I'm saying from address A, send X amount to address B, that address A has to have X amount in it for me to send it. How do we know that it has that X amount? Well, because it's on the chain. So the money never leaves the chain. It's all on the chain. What changes is the lock that's on the money. Like I said, let it marinate. When we talk about the analogy, it'll hopefully make a little more sense. Okay. Now, who are the rule enforcers? Because you need somebody to enforce the rules. And this is really cool. This is something which, again, is a rabbit hole once you kind of realize how it works. And I'll offer an analogy as to who the rule makers are. Every single node is the rule enforcer. And the way they do it is like PEMDAS. So parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. PEMDAS, if you remember back to algebra, and that's as mathematically as sophisticated as I'm going to go. But what PEMDAS does is you get a equation, and if you don't have a set way to navigate it, then you're going to end up in a different location than somebody else. So PEMDAS is this thing that everybody adopts freely, and that's how we can all arrive at the same answer to an equation. But what happens if somebody has SEPMAD, and they said, you know what, I really love subtraction. I'm going to do subtraction first, then I'm doing exponents, then parentheses, and so on and so forth. They're free to do that. They're going to end up with a different answer. So what they've just done is they've broken consensus from those of us who are doing PEMDAS. They're doing their own thing. And ultimately what that does is it shoots themselves in the foot. Imagine it like this. I have my ledger, and I say, you know what, Bank of America? You now have $0. I have all your money. And I go to Bank of America, and I say, here's my ledger. And Bank of America goes, here's our ledger, get lost. So if you're free to kind of do whatever you want with the ledger, but every node acting in its own self-interest is enforcing the rules. So it's like PEMDAS. They each decide, okay, I'm going to do this. And that's what effectively enforces the rules. And they're incentivized to enforce the rules in accord with everyone else. Like I said, think of it like this. Effectively, you want to break consensus, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Good luck with that. Go do your own thing. So let's reiterate, the blockchain is the record of every transaction, going all the way back to that very first one back in 2009. If the blockchain is the record of every transaction, where is the record kept? Let that hang for a second, because I've already told you. So it is kept on every node in the network. So every node has every transaction that has ever occurred in Bitcoin. Full stop. So it's like the library. This node has the full list. This node has the full list. This node has the full list, and so on and so forth. So it's not just one ledger. It's a copy of the same ledger that's being independently added to, independently on each node. like the library. Now, just another segue, like why Bitcoin? Let's just do a quick hits on some features and benefits, if they haven't already become clear to you. So permissionless, you don't have to ask permission to enter or send a transaction. We haven't talked about this, but effectively you can hold your wealth in your head. You can cross a border with potentially, billions of dollars because you've memorized a particular number or phrase. It's anonymous to a degree. It can be very anonymous or not. You can be rest assured that it's stable. Not in terms of the price, obviously that fluctuates a lot, but in terms of the issuance that, okay, I know at any one moment you can know exactly where all the money is. So you can verify all these things. Incredible. And then it's also got a really great network. And that's something which people overlook. There are a lot of people who move in this space, very clever, bright people, and that's not nothing. That creates a fairly robust network. And it incentivizes the users to play by the rules. So those are some great reasons, I think, to entertain why Bitcoin. It's a big thing and has potential to be a really big thing. And even like other cryptocurrencies, a lot of them are the Bitcoin protocol, but what the developers have done is they've tweaked one thing or something else. Like Dogecoin, it's the only time I'm going to mention other cryptos. Dogecoin is the Bitcoin protocol, and some people said, you know what, we want to change the rules, so clearly they're not doing Bitcoin anymore, and they're going to do something else. So that's why I think, why Bitcoin? But again, let's not force it. Let's take another break, and we'll make this one 5. If you'll indulge me, I know I said about an hour and a half. We started a little late, so I just think it's worth it to take a 5-minute break. The last section, or next section, isn't too long, and it's a lot more tactile. So 5-minute break, starts now.
Hello everyone, this is your presenter, Kevin Gerns. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for the Bitcoin is talk and event. Please give them your support if you're in need of any of their services. So first we have Cities Web Services, whose goal is to implement digital marketing strategies to get businesses new customers, keep existing ones, and increase revenue from both. They combine local experts in your community with a top-tier in-house production team to meet the dynamic challenges of maintaining a robust business presence online. So if you're looking for web design, search engine optimization, web hosting, content management, creation, things like that, look into citieswebservices.com. And also want to plug Straight Productions. Straight Productions is a full-service creative production company producing high-quality photo and web content for direct clients and marketing agencies throughout the United States. If your company needs photo or video assets captured, please contact them, as their expertise is in connecting clients with creative. And you can find them at straightproductions.com. And just also want to give a special thanks to Josh Zenner Productions for filming our evening's production. Thank you very much. Please give them your support.